Have you ever wondered how a lake, larger than the state of Delaware, could be on the verge of completely disappearing within our lifetime? Have you ever considered what happens to the millions of people living nearby when a massive body of water turns into a toxic dust bowl? And here is the question that should terrify everyone, not just Utah residents. What happens when one of the most important ecosystems in North America collapses, taking with it billions of dollars in economic activity, the health of millions of people, and even the viability of the Winter Olympics? We are going to talk about a slow-motion disaster that most people have never heard of, but that could become the greatest environmental catastrophe the United States experiences this century. We are going to talk about the Great Salt Lake in Utah, a lake that has already shrunk by more than 71% since 1987, and that scientists warn could completely vanish within the next few years if nothing changes. This is not just a story about water levels. It is a story about explosive population growth, about agriculture in the desert, about political reluctance to regulate, about climate change, and about what happens when we take more from nature than nature can give back. It is also a story about the people living there, the families, the communities, and the future generations who will inherit the consequences of decisions being made right now. Let us start with the warning. In early January 2023, a group of researchers from Brigham Young University published a report with an ominous message. The Great Salt Lake, the largest saline lake in the Western Hemisphere, and located directly adjacent to Salt Lake City, was on track to completely disappear within the next 5 years, by 2028. To understand why this warning was so dire, you have to understand how dramatically the lake has already shrunk. Back in 1987, when the lake reached its historical high point, it covered roughly 3,300 square miles. That is larger than the entire state of Delaware. From there until early 2023, the lake's size decreased by more than 71%,
Got it.
leaving
Moving to the
just
next row.
950 square miles.
Good. The ground is taking it
The
well.
area of dry, exposed
it's
lakebed
soaking in
left
deep.
behind was larger than the island of Maui. Now, thanks to record-high snowfall that came almost immediately after that warning, the Great Salt Lake has modestly recovered some of its size over the next 2 winters. But many scientists still warn that, without massive human intervention, the lake's long-term decline is all but certain, in a world that is warming and living far beyond its means when it comes to water resources. The 2024 to 2025 winter season was abysmally low for snowfall, one of the lowest on record. The danger has not gone away. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the Great Salt Lake actually is, and how it fits into the larger geography of the American West. The modern Great Salt Lake is the successor to a massive ancient lake called Lake Bonneville. During the last ice age, when the climate was cooler and wetter, Lake Bonneville covered nearly 51,000 square kilometers and was more than 300 meters deep,
here.
roughly the size of modern Lake Michigan.
Good.
It was more of
Depth
an
is
inland sea than a mere
2.34 meters.
lake.
Recording.
As the ice age ended and the climate warmed, the lake dramatically shrank, leaving behind a series of smaller successor lakes, including the Great Salt Lake. Today, these lakes create one of the largest oases of life, cradled within the great North American deserts. If you draw a line from the Pacific coast eastward, you quickly enter the vast desert of the Great Basin, which covers most of Nevada, one of the driest and least hospitable regions in North America. But in between all of these deserts, hundreds of miles away from the lush areas of Northern California, there is a huge green oasis, 100 miles north to south, cradled between the Great Salt Lake in the west and the Wasatch Mountains in the east, where abundant life and civilization become possible again.
On the left, a winter with
Today,
heavy
this
snowfall.
oasis is
On the
home
right,
to a
a season
densely
with visibly
populated,
reduced snow.
continuous
These
metropolis
changes impact
of
the ski
cities and
season,
people.
the environment, and local winter
Running
sports
north
is at
to
stake.
south are the metropolitan areas of Ogden, Clearfield, Salt Lake City, Provo, and Orem, collectively home to more than 2.8 million people now. This region, called the Wasatch Front, is home to more than 80% of Utah's entire statewide population. It has also been one of the fastest growing regions in America,
Industrial systems
thanks
divert
to its
river water through
spectacular
canals,
natural
feeding
beauty
lakes for human
and
needs.
relatively modest cost of
Dams
living
control the
compared to
flow,
California
ensuring
and the
ecosystems
Northeast.
and communities.
The Wasatch Front first began receiving significant European settlement in 1847 with the arrival of Mormon pioneers. Over about 20 years, roughly 70,000 of them trekked across the continent to settle in the area. They founded Salt Lake City on the edge of the Great Salt Lake and made it the global headquarters of the Mormon Church, which it remains today. For nearly a century after that, the population remained modest, within the bounds of what could naturally be supported. By 1950, the Wasatch Front had only about 500,000 people, but from there, the population exploded. By 1980, it doubled to roughly 1 million. By the 2000s, it doubled again to 2 million. Now, in 2025, there are more than 2.8 million people, nearly 6 times as many as lived there in 1950. To accommodate this rapid growth, Utah is currently experiencing the 4th highest level of new home construction in the country.
This fine dust from a
This
polluted
has
lakebed
created a
contains
booming
arsenic
economy
and other
that greatly
toxic metals.
benefits elected members
Wind
of the Utah
disperses these
State
particles,
Legislature,
posing risks to
since around a
ecosystems
third
and
of them
human
are
health.
estimated to have ties to the real estate industry. Historically, all of this growth has been fueled by the region's unique hydrology. Heavy snowfalls in the Wasatch Mountains during winter, which tower above the oasis to the east. Then, during the spring, that snow melts and feeds the region's 3 great rivers, the Bear, the Weber, and the Jordan, which all empty into the Great Salt Lake and provide
This
it
lake
with
in
virtually all
1987
of
was
its
surrounded
water.
by dense,
The
pristine
Great
forest.
Salt Lake itself
By the present
is a
day,
terminal,
development has reshaped the
endorheic,
landscape.
saline lake
The comparison
with no
reveals
natural
profound
outlet.
changes to this natural
The
environment.
only way water leaves the lake naturally is through evaporation. Before the era of extensive human settlement, this system existed within a fragile balance. During the warm summer, natural evaporation would cause the lake to lose about 2 feet of water, which would then be replaced the following spring when snowmelt fed back into the lake. Now, however, 2 major factors are disrupting that balance. First,
The water is drying
explosive
up. We must
population
act
growth
now.
in the
Water
Wasatch
is life.
Front
Stop
is
the
increasing the
overuse.
region's
Big
water demand.
corporations stealing God
Second,
here.
climate change is increasing temperatures and evaporation rates in the lake beyond historical norms. Beginning in the 1900s, federal and state construction of dams, canals, and pipelines along the 3 major rivers enabled more water to be diverted for purposes such as agriculture, industry, and municipal water use in growing cities. This began depriving the Great Salt Lake of much of its ability to replenish itself naturally. By the 1960s, human water consumption had already reached unsustainable levels for the lake's
Soil sample
long-term
12,
stability.
mid-lake bed.
Copy
The
that.
lake
Water sample
began
incoming.
declining.
Good. Label it for pH.
Then, an extraordinarily
Done. Ready to
rare
move to the
wet
next site?
period in
Yes,
the
let's wrap this up.
1980s briefly replenished what had been lost. But after that climactic period ended, and the lake reached its peak size in 1987, it has been in nearly continuous decline ever since. Between 2020 and 2023, the Great Salt Lake was receiving less than 1/3 of the water through the 3 rivers that it had historically received. Its ability to replenish natural losses through evaporation became crippled. Let me give you some numbers to understand the scale of the problem. The Great Salt Lake naturally receives about 3.1 million acre-feet of water per year through its rivers, plus another 600,000 acre-feet through direct precipitation. About 2.6 million acre-feet of water evaporate. That means the sustainable level of human water consumption from the system would be around 1.1 million acre-feet per year to keep the lake stable. However, the current rate of human water consumption catastrophically exceeds this. Humans are withdrawing about 2.1 million acre-feet per year from the rivers upstream, while mineral extraction operations at the lake withdraw another 200,000 acre-feet. That means the Great Salt Lake has been experiencing an annual water deficit of 1.2 million acre-feet for years now. That is what is driving the lake's shrinkage. To fully restore the Great Salt Lake and save it, the millions of people living in the Wasatch Front will need to collectively cut their current water consumption rate by more than half. That is a massive obstacle, especially given the region's ingrained industries and its dreams of even further growth beyond already strained water resources. Here is something that might surprise you. The cities and industries in the Wasatch Front only use about 9% of the water being pulled from the rivers. An astonishing 90% of that usage is dedicated exclusively to outdoor water use, like watering lawns and plants. Salt Lake City residents consume 96 gallons of water per person per day, which is significantly more than residents of other desert cities like Tucson or Los Angeles, where residents consume 78 and 77 gallons, respectively. Mineral extraction from the lake itself consumes another 9%. Water losses through leaks and inefficiencies consume another 8%. But by far the largest use of water in the Wasatch Front is agriculture, which consumes a whopping 74% of all the water currently being pulled from the system. Agriculture in Utah is naturally challenging, since the state is dry and mostly covered by deserts and mountain valleys. Farmers who acquired water rights early in Utah's history found that alfalfa was one of the few economically viable crops that could be grown there. It is well adapted to arid environments and can be harvested multiple times a year. It also supports the state's dairy and beef industries. But alfalfa requires a lot of water to grow and sustain itself, so much so that out of the 74% of all water in the Great Salt Lake Basin dedicated to agriculture, 34% is entirely dedicated to just growing alfalfa. Think about that. More than a third of all water consumed by humans in this entire system goes to a single crop. While alfalfa is a staple of Utah's rural economy, it is an extremely minor component of the state's overall economy, accounting for less than 1% of the state's total GDP, despite how much water it consumes. Utah's Republican-dominated government, which bristles at even the thought of regulation, has been reluctant to constrain the alfalfa industry's water consumption. It is a major component of the rural Utah economy, which heavily leans Republican, and it supports the dairy and beef industries, which are also big in those rural areas. So far, the Utah state government has done virtually nothing to curb the overuse of water. Doing what is necessary to really stabilize the lake by cutting water consumption in half is politically dangerous, since it would harm influential farmers and ranchers. At the same time, Utah has made no plans to halt the development of suburban sprawl, radiating throughout the Wasatch Front. Despite already living far beyond their natural means, the Salt Lake City metropolitan area is projected to add another 600,000 residents by 2060. To meet the increased demand, the region will have to either divert even more water from the rivers that feed the lake, recycle more wastewater, or pull more groundwater, all of which will further decrease the amount of water entering the Great Salt Lake. And just as humans are pulling more water from the system, climate change is increasing the lake's natural rate of evaporation. The Brigham Young University researchers estimated that human greenhouse gas emissions have caused a warming of around 4 degrees Fahrenheit in northern Utah since the start of the 20th century. This has increased the pace of evaporation, accounting for roughly 9% of the lake's decline since the late 1980s. The vast majority of the rest comes from diversions to the rivers, primarily for agriculture and alfalfa. So what happens if the worst comes to pass, and the lake really does vanish? Beneath the surface of saline lakes, pollutants caused by nearby human activities like mining, agriculture, urban runoff, and coal burning become concentrated over time. The lakebed beneath the Great Salt Lake contains high amounts of toxic materials like arsenic, lead, mercury, copper, antimony, zirconium, and others. As the lake continues to dry, more and more of these toxic materials, currently safely buried beneath the lake, will become exposed to the surface. They will increasingly get picked up by the wind and form highly toxic dust clouds that will threaten the health of millions of people all across the Wasatch Front. The more the lake shrinks, the worse the air quality will become. Large-scale toxic dust storms will exacerbate regional rates of respiratory illnesses, eye conditions, cancers, cardiovascular damage, reproductive dysfunction, and other problems. This will sharply negatively affect the quality of life, harm local businesses' ability to attract and retain employees, and put downward pressure on real estate prices as the region becomes a less desirable place to live and work. To understand how bad this could get, look about 560 miles southwest at the Salton Sea in Southern California, another shrinking saline lake. It is only about 1/10 the size of the Great Salt Lake at its peak, and is in a fairly rural area with only about 650,000 people. Yet its decline has dramatically increased airborne dust levels, leading to childhood asthma rates more than 3 times the California statewide average, and inflicting an estimated $7 billion loss on the local real estate market. With a lake 10 times the size and a regional population more than 4 times larger, the loss of the Great Salt Lake will be even more catastrophic. Toxins from the dust storms will also become deposited across agricultural lands, degrading soil fertility and undermining the long-term potential for agriculture anyway, even if farmers don't cut back today. The dust could also blow across state lines, impacting communities in Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and Arizona. To make matters worse, the shrinking lake and increased dust storms will begin to decrease the region's snowpack, further eliminating the lake's ability to replenish itself and undermining one of the region's key industries, winter sports. Dust blowing up from the dried lakebed will become deposited on the Wasatch Mountains and increase the melting rate of snowpack, shortening the snow season. Meanwhile, the increasingly smaller lake will produce less of a regional lake effect during the winter. During the winter, cold air picks up heat and moisture from the relatively warmer body of water in the Great Salt Lake, forming clouds that dump snow downwind across the Wasatch Mountains, adding greatly to the region's snowfall. Without the lake, this effect will be permanently lost. A study published by the Environmental Law Institute earlier this year concluded that the loss of the lake effect will potentially decrease the average annual snowpack in the Wasatch Mountains by between 5.1 and 8.4%. That would be cataclysmic for the ski and snowboard season across the many resorts in the area. In 2022, when the lake shrank to its lowest level, the ski season was 2 weeks shorter than it otherwise would have been. With the complete loss of the lake, the season will grow even shorter, threatening what is currently a $2 billion a year ski industry that directly supports nearly 26,000 jobs, and potentially even threatening the viability of the 2034 Winter Olympics, scheduled to take place in Salt Lake City. Even worse, the decreased snowpack will further reduce the region's available water supplies for agricultural, industrial, and municipal uses, further restraining the state's ability to grow. The mineral extraction industry that currently operates in the Great Salt Lake will be entirely destroyed by its loss, directly threatening more than 5,000 additional jobs and crippling the supply of potash fertilizer and magnesium that are critical for American agriculture and beverage can production. The lake is also home to a thriving brine shrimp industry, currently providing around 40% of the entire global supply of brine shrimp, used as a primary feed source for raising fish and aquacultures around the world. Its loss will collapse this industry too, threatening another 500 jobs and another $67 million in annual economic output. The Great Salt Lake is also a critical link in the Pacific Flyway, the major north-south migratory pattern taken by birds between Alaska and South America. It provides habitat and food that support more than 10 million migratory birds a year, belonging to hundreds of species. If the lake disappears, so will these birds, undermining recreational bird watching as well. In other words, the loss of the Great Salt Lake will be far more cataclysmic for Utah than doing what is necessary to save it in the present, by cutting its overuse of water. Perhaps the biggest parallel for Salt Lake City today is what Los Angeles went through in the 20th century, during its own never-ending quest for water. In the early 1900s, LA was growing rapidly and running out of water. The Los Angeles Water Department bought up land along the banks of the Owens River and constructed a vast aqueduct that diverted the river's waters 230 miles away to Los Angeles. The Owens River was the primary source feeding nearby Owens Lake, which back then spanned over 100 square miles. The unsustainable amount of water diverted from the river sent Owens Lake into an irreversible downward spiral, and by 1926, it had completely dried up and was lost forever. Since then, the collapse of Owens Lake has become one of America's greatest environmental catastrophes. Wind has kicked up fine dust from the dried lakebed for nearly a century, spiking asthma and heart conditions. It has been the largest source of fine dust pollution in the United States for decades, and it is only 1/15 the size of the Great Salt Lake. Local residents successfully sued the city of Los Angeles, and the city was ordered to reduce the dust problem. Since then, despite spending more than $2.5 billion, LA has struggled to contain the disaster. They have attempted to cover the entire lakebed with gravel and installed countless sprinklers to spray just enough water to keep the dust in place. Dozens of full-time employees are present at all times, trying to keep pollution down. Most of the small towns around the former lake have declined and rotted away as air quality worsened. Scaled up to a lake 15 times larger, with millions of people nearby, a similar fate for the Great Salt Lake would potentially become the greatest ecological disaster in the United States during the entire 21st century. One cannot discount the potential cultural effects either. Salt Lake City itself was named after the Great Salt Lake when it was first settled nearly 2 centuries ago. Without the lake, the city's name will eventually become symbolic of a bygone era caused by humanity's own hubris and lack of respect for nature. To turn things around and save the lake, Utah will have to rapidly curb its overconsumption of water. That will be painful because it will harm Utah's agricultural industry and reduce the growth of suburban sprawl and lawns that the state so loves. But not taking that painful step in the short term will result in significantly more pain in the long term if it ends up causing the complete collapse of the Great Salt Lake. The choice is stark. Cut water consumption now, or face an environmental and economic catastrophe that will make the current situation look like the good old days. The lake is not just a scenic backdrop. It is an essential part of the region's ecology, economy, and identity, and it is dying. If you found value in this deep dive, if it made you think differently about water consumption, about growth, about the hidden costs of the things we take for granted, make sure you like this video, subscribe to infographics, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the Great Salt Lake is not just Utah's problem. It is a warning to every community living beyond its means, every region that thinks growth can continue forever, every government that chooses short-term political gain over long-term survival. What happens in Utah will not stay in Utah. The dust will cross state lines. The lessons will apply everywhere. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.